Alright, I think everything is good to go. So I was requested to do a. We had a question of the day in Reads where we were told what was something that we could just talk about off the top of our head for 40 consecutive minutes. And I listed a few things. I talked about my fandom of the history of wrestling. I talked about how I could talk about Survivor for 40 minutes at a time. Uh, Various things like that. And I also mentioned the fact that I could probably do it for competitive Pokemon. And Jason said that he really would want to see that, so that's what this is. I don't know how much Jason has played competitive Pokemon, so I'm going to assume a relatively low level of knowledge about the games. And if you know more about this, and if this is information that you already know, then it is not going to be very useful for you. However, I'm going to assume, basically, I'm going to go into this assuming that you have played a Pokemon game before. You have successfully played through a children's game that 10-year-olds are supposed to be able to beat, uh, whatever Pokemon that game that is. So you have the basic idea of how the games work. You catch Pokemon in Pokeballs, and you battle them, and you use moves to kill other Pokemon, knock them out, knock out other Pokemon. You know, the basics of how Pokemon works. You can have 6 Pokemon on a team, stuff like that. This video is going to be taking you through the basics of competitive Pokemon and what makes it such a complex game, what makes it a game that I find extremely interesting, and go through the basics of how competitive Pokemon works. So the first thing about Pokemon that's the most important thing to keep in mind is that Pokemon, when played competitively, is a turn-based strategy game, very similar to games like Fire Emblem or chess or poker. And there are a lot of similarities to those last two. This is the type of game that I really like playing and can talk about for hours. So it's a turn-based strategy game. That means every turn you do something, your opponent does something, and then the game progresses. And it's not a reaction-based game. It's not a Twitch game. You Twitch-based game. There's nothing like that about Pokemon. It's you have sometimes there are timers, but generally speaking, you have however long you want to take for each turn. So we'll go into why that matters later, but let's talk about if you know the basics of Pokemon, let's talk about what is so special about Pokemon competitively and what all you need to know about Pokemon that's so different from competitive Pokemon compared to just if you were playing your random game. So, every Pokemon has a unique set of features that makes that Pokemon what it is. There are a list of these things, and the what is the answer to these questions basically will show you how viable an individual Pokemon is. I'm going to take an example like Garchomp because I think it's a good example for showing what I'm talking about. So each Pokemon has a list of traits. Those things are its typing. You see Garchomp's typing here is Dragon and Ground. Its ability pool, which are the abilities that a Pokemon can have. Its move pool, these are the moves that it can use. If you've ever watched the anime before, if you've ever played a game and you see, Pikachu use Thunderbolt, that's the move that we're talking about. Move pool, what are the moves that each individual Pokemon gets access to? And then, of course, if you've played the games, you know that each Pokemon can only have up to 4 moves at a time. That's a very important part of Pokemon as well. Finally, the other part of a Pokemon that you have to decide on is its stats. And its stats are going to determine how strong or how viable it is as a Pokemon as well. The stats portion of Pokemon is easily the most complicated, and it's the one that I will tackle last. Let's start with typing. So we have each individual Pokemon. How good is it when you're battling against other people? How good is it competitively in this context? The first question you have to ask is what is its typing? So as we can see, Garchomp's typing is Dragon and Ground. What does that mean? Well, your typing is going to determine 3 things. 2 things objectively, and one third thing a little bit more in an auxiliary way, and it's not always quite as clear cut. The first thing it decides is how you take various different moves. What does that mean? Well, a dragon type, a Pokemon that is a dragon type, is going to take a certain amount of damage, extra or less, from specific types of moves. Think rock, paper, scissors. If you were if Rock Paper Scissors was a Pokemon game, and you were a Rock type, well, you'd be good against Scissors, and you'd be bad against Paper, right? So if a Paper attack, let's say, hits your Rock type, you'd be taking extra damage from it because Paper covers Rock. If you're a Rock type, you hit a Rock with the Scissors Pokemon, Rock beats Scissors, Scissors beats Paper. This is the basics of Pokemon. Pokemon typings is Rock, Paper, Scissors, but on absolute, utter steroids. Let's show you what I'm talking about. This is a Pokemon type chart. And if I can... Again, this is completely, like, no preparation. I just thought this would be easy to do. Okay. So, this is what I'm talking about. Rock, paper, scissors, but 18 of them, and they have a different number of what we call weaknesses and resistances than just the one each if you were playing rock, paper, scissors. So, Garchomp is a dragon and ground type. Pokemon have types. You probably know moves also have types. Thunderbolt, you can see a list of moves that Garchomp gets here, right? Aqua Tail, Brick Break, Crunch, Draco Meteor, Dragon Claw, these are all moves as well. Moves have types too. And if you hit a Pokemon with a certain type of attack, then that is going to determine what type of damage you're going to be doing to the Pokemon defensively. So let's take a look at Garchomp. Garchomp is a dragon type and a ground type. If you want to decide how much damage Garchomp is going to take from any certain type of attack, you look at a type chart. So let's say that you want to... Let's say a different Pokemon wants to attack Garchomp with an Aqua Tail, a water type attack. Okay, well, you look at water. On the left here you have the attacking types. You look at water. You go to the part that says dragon up here, the defensive type. Dragon's over on the right. You line them up as if it's like a multiplication table, and you see that water into dragon is red on this chart. That means that if you hit a water type with a dragon type attack, the attack is multiplied by 0.5, or the damage is halved, essentially. So if you hit a water type with a dragon type attack, it's called resisting the attack, or it being not very effective. You've probably seen that screen on Pokemon. If you've ever played a Pokemon game, you'll see the attack was not very effective. That's what that means. Okay, but that's only one of Garchomp's types, right? Garchomp's a dragon type, Garchomp's a dragon type, Garchomp's also a ground type. Well, you also have to look at water into ground. So you see water here, and you see ground, this column. You line them up, and you see water is actually green against ground. That means that it's super effective. That's the super effective screen if you've ever played Pokemon, or the damage is multiplied by a multiplier of 2x. The damage is doubled. So, what you do to decide how much damage Garchomp, the specific Pokemon, takes from a water type attack, you multiply the water into ground multiplier by the water into dragon multiplier, in this case 2 times 0.5 or half, and Garchomp takes just normal damage, 2 times 0.5 equals 1, to a water type attack. Any attack that you hit into any Pokemon is going to go through this same sequence. We can quickly go through some other examples. Let's say you hit Garchomp with a fire type attack. Well, fire into ground is 1 times, so it's just neutral. What's that? What that's called. So there's no multiplier there. Excuse me. But dragon, if you go fire to dragon, Garchomp resists fire. Right. Do this with various different types. Say an electric type. Well, dragon, if you do electric this row, dragon this column, dragon resists electric. But if you do electric and ground, for example, you see ground up here, there's actually a black box there. That means that ground is actually immune to electric. If you hit a Pokemon that's a ground type with an electric type attack, it's going to be hit by a multiplier of times 0. It's not going to be effective at all. It doesn't matter what else the Pokemon is. It doesn't matter if the other type is weak to electric or electric that's super effective against it. If it's a ground type, it's going to do 0 damage. So Garchomp is actually immune to electric in this example. Finally, one other example, just to show it quickly, is the ice type. So if you look at ice, again, these are just exercises to kind of look at a type chart and learn kind of what you're looking at, because it can be a little bit confusing at first. Ice, the row here, is attacking a ground type, right? Well, that's 2 times, so green. So ice is super effective against ground. So that part, Garchomp is 2 times weak against. And then if you look at ice over to dragon over here, this column, it's also green. So ice is super effective against ground. Ice is also super effective against dragon. That means that Garchomp is actually double weak to ice, oftentimes known as a quad weakness. You hit an ice type attack on a ground and dragon type like Garchomp, and it's going to, when everything's said and done, you're going to then multiply the damage by 4, not 2, not 1, not 0 like in the previous examples, or not by 1/2, nothing like that. Can hit a Garchomp with an ice type attack, usually it's going to die, generally speaking, but that's for later. So the first thing that a typing will do for a Pokemon to determine its viability is determine what types of attacks that Pokemon is weak to, or it'll take double damage from, what types of attacks that Pokemon is resistant to, or it'll take half damage from, and then other things like what types it might be immune to, what types it might be quad weak to, like we saw in this example. One thing I didn't really address is the website you're looking at right now on your screen. This is PokemonShowdown.com. This is a battle simulator, so it has all of the same features that normal Pokemon does if you were to play the game on a cartridge or on a Switch. But the main difference is it gives you a lot more flexibility in getting the Pokemon, and you can just add it to your team, like I did here. You see, I made a team, and I could delete Garchomp, I could add Garchomp, and type it in, and boom, I have Garchomp on my team. In actual Pokemon, it's much more complicated than that, and a gigantic pain in the ass to get a Pokemon to be competitively viable. We'll talk about what that means later. But in this, it's just for ease of access. And there are a lot of different useful tools on Pokemon Showdown's website, as you can see here, play.pokemonshowdown.com, that can make it easier to step into the world of competitive Pokemon. Don't worry about chat rooms in general. I am just showing you an example of something. If you wanted to look at just easily, without having to dig into a type chart if you're new, to what types Garchomp is weak to, you can do /weak Garchomp, and it shows you this. We talked about this before. It resists fire, right? You see water's not on the list at all. That means it's not weak to or resistant to water, so it isn't hit super effectively or not very effectively. It is immune to electric. It's also immune to sandstorm damage. That's a separate thing. Don't worry about that. And then finally, it's weak to a couple of other types, but also you see ice is bolded. That means that that shows a quad weakness. I'm not going to go into the why of this, but you could show an example of this with a different Pokemon if there was a quad resistance, like in Talonflame's case. Talonflame's a fire and flying type. Fire resists bug, flying resists bug, so you see the bug is bolded. I'm going to get out of the chat room because Pokemon Showdown chat rooms are cancerous. But that is the basics of the most important feature of a Pokemon's typing. What other attacks are going to be hit by it super effectively, not very effectively, and various other things. So that's the first thing with the Pokemon's typing. The second thing with the Pokemon's typing is it decides what types of attacks it uses will get a bonus. What does that mean? Well, now we have to get a little bit into moves. Again, if you know anything about Pokemon, you've probably heard of, Pikachu use Thunderbolt, Charizard use Flamethrower, whatever. Well, Pikachu's the Pokemon, Thunderbolt's the move, right? That's the attack. If you've ever played a Pokemon game, that's an attack that you're using. These are the moves that we're talking about. Well, moves have a lot of different features to them. One of those things, as we've briefly discussed, is a typing itself. Aqua Tail, for example, is a water-type move. Brick Break, you can see here the fight symbol here, that means it's a fighting type move. Draco Meteor, Dragon Claw, Dragon Pulse, Dragon Tail. Earthquake is a ground type move. Fire Blast is a fire type move. Flamethrower is a fire type move. So each move has a typing as well. Each move, if it's an attack, and I'll go into the difference between moves that are attacks and moves that are not attacks later, but each move, if it's an attack, also has a base power to it. The power of a move is the first step in the calculation of how much damage it is going to do to the opposing Pokemon when you use that attack. The base power is the first constant in that calculation. So you start with a base power, and then you add a bunch of other multipliers to it, and eventually from those multipliers you get to a final power of the move based on various different things. One of those things is this bonus that is decided by the Pokemon's typing. That is called the Stab, or Same Type Attack bonus. What does this mean? Well, Garchomp here is a Dragon type and a Ground type, right? Well, you see Garchomp gets various dragon type and ground type moves. A bunch of dragon moves, a few ground moves, right? Well, if Garchomp, because it's a dragon type and a ground type, uses a dragon type move or a ground type move on a Pokemon, it is going to get this same type attack bonus multiplier of 1.5 times. So let's take Dragon Claw as an example, right? I just added Dragon Claw to my move list, right? It's now a move on this Pokemon. Well, Dragon Claw has a base power of 80, but if you add the same type attack bonus to the move, so if a dragon type uses the dragon move Dragon Claw, you're going to get that 1.5 times multiplier, and now it's going to have an effective power of 120. That is one of those multipliers we're talking about. The other one, the other main one, is the super effective, not very effective thing. Same type attack bonus makes a huge difference in how effective various moves are. For example, let's compare two moves. Let's compare Earthquake, a move that Garchomp gets, it's a ground type attack, and let's compare Poison Jab. So let's say that you're in a situation where your Garchomp is facing a Pokemon. That Pokemon takes normal damage from ground type attacks. It takes neutral damage from ground type attacks. Well, what is the effective base power of Earthquake in that situation? Well, Earthquake is a ground type move, so it's going to get the same type attack bonus from Garchomp. It's a 100 base power move, so you multiply those two things, 100 base power times 1.5 times the stab bonus. So we just said it was neutral, it's not weak to or resistant to Earthquake. So Earthquake's going to have a 150 base power effective when you're hitting whatever Pokemon this is with that attack. Okay, cool. Now let's compare that to a move like Poison Jab. Well, Poison Jab, as we see, is a poison type attack. Garchomp, of course, doesn't get the stab bonus on a poison type attack because it's not a poison type. It's 80 base power. So, however, in this scenario, let's say Poison Jab is actually super effective against whatever Pokemon Garchomp is attacking. Well, Poison Jab is an 80 base power move. The super effective multiplier is 2 times. So 80 times 2 is 160 effective power. So Poison Jab will be hitting whatever Pokemon this is with an effective power of 180. And Earthquake will be hitting 160. And Earthquake will be hitting whatever Pokemon this is with an effective power of 150. So Poison Jab is super effective. It'll show that big text on the screen, super effective, right? Cool. And Earthquake won't do that. It's just a normal power move. However, the final power difference between the two moves hitting this Pokemon is only 10. 160 versus 150, which is a difference, but the difference is a lot smaller than you might expect, considering one is super effective and the other is only neutrally effective. This is to show the lesson that being super effective, while oftentimes very important, isn't always the most important thing. Pokemon is a lot like poker in the way that you have, sort of your starting hand in poker is very similar to the Pokemon that you have, and the opponent's starting hand is very similar to the Pokemon that the opponents have. Just because Poison Jab in this scenario might be more powerful against the Pokemon on the field currently, and I'll talk about why that matters later, the Pokemon on the field currently, it might not always be the better move to attack with in that situation because of the other scenarios that could take place on that move. Say you have a Pokemon, you could click Earthquake, you could click Poison Jab. Poison Jab would be slightly more powerful, but Earthquake would still hit almost just as hard on this Pokemon. But that other Pokemon, maybe they switch out another function you probably understand if you've played Pokemon before, into a different Pokemon. Let's say that Pokemon takes like no damage from Poison Jab or resists Poison Jab, but is also neutral to Earthquake, would also take normal damage from Earthquake, so it maintains that effective base power of 150 compared to Poison Jab's effective base power in that situation of maybe 40, or maybe even 0, or maybe 20. Maybe it's immune. So in that situation, if you're not sure what your opponent's going to do, maybe that opponent will stay in, maybe that opponent will switch out, Earthquake might actually be the better attack to attack with, because in general it will do more damage covering multiple options. This is a bit of a complex scenario, but I'm trying to kind of slowly dip your feet into it of kind of what that can look like. Because that is the world that you're stepping into when you step into competitive Pokemon. It is a wide world of hundreds of thousands of different potential options, webs of scenarios and possibilities all the way from the beginning of turn one. Uh, and we're only one step of the way there. So, the point of this is all the way back to typings, right? We're talking about the first thing that decides how viable any individual Pokemon is its typing. First thing typing does, like we said, is decides what attacks, what types of attacks that Pokemon's going to be resistant to, weak to, immune to, those sorts of things. The second thing is it decides stab. So, Dragon ground type attack, get that stab 1.5 times multiplier, right? There's one final thing that a typing will, for the most part, decide, and that's going to decide what types of moves that Pokemon will get. What does that mean? This is a more minor thing, and it's also not always true. But generally speaking, if you're a certain type, you're going to get more moves of that type than moves not of that type. So, for example, Garchomp's a ground and dragon type. You see a lot of dragon type moves and a fair number of ground type moves. Draco Meteor, Dragon Claw, Dragon Pulse, Dragon Tail, Earth Power, Earthquake. Scroll down, Outrage, Scorching Sands. You go into the useless moves, you'll get a lot of them, right? Bulldoze, Dig, Dragon Breath, Dragon Rush, Dual Chop, Mud Chop, Mud Slap, Sand Attack, Scale Shot. You get the point. Lots of Dragon type moves, lots of Ground type moves. But for Garchomp's case, a fair bit of other moves as well. Now, this isn't always the case. There are plenty of moves in Pokemon that are available to plenty of Pokemon not of that type. And then there are plenty of Pokemon that aren't restricted or don't have a majority of their move pool be decided by the types that Pokemon is. However, a general rule is that, generally speaking, you're going to have more moves of your type than you will of moves of other types. So those are the three things that a typing will decide in Pokemon, and it's one of the most important things when deciding how viable a Pokemon is. Let's move on to abilities. Abilities are pretty easy to explain. There are a lot of them, but the point of abilities right now is that all they do is they have some sort of extra advantage that's oftentimes pretty unique that Pokemon will gain. Abilities are unlike types, right? Typings, there are only so many different typing combinations you can have, and having a unique pair of types, what we call a dual type, in this case Dragon Ground would be your dual type, your typing. Having a unique typing is pretty rare in Pokemon. Abilities are a lot more widely distributed. There are a lot more abilities. There are only 18 types. There are a lot of abilities. That's not what I meant to do. Abilities. I could scroll here for a while. There are a lot of different abilities. And each ability is only given to so many Pokemon. So if a Pokemon has a specific ability, it's probably a pretty unique trait and feature of that ability. If we just scroll through the Pokemon that are in the overused tier, and I'll talk about what tiering system is later, not important right now. If we scroll through, you'll see a fair number of shared typings, right? There's a Steel type, another Steel type, a normal type, you see Dragon type, Dragon type, Dragon type, Steel type, Steel type, Steel type, Ground type, Ground type. You get the point. There are going to be a lot of shared typings here. They're not going to be nearly as many shared abilities. Like, this Pokemon has Swift Swim, right? How many more Pokemon in this entire tier are going to also have the Swift Swim ability? Maybe the answer is 0. I'm just kind of quickly going through it. Yeah, the answer is 0. How many of them are going to have the Propeller ability? The answer is 0 because that's actually a unique ability. A signature ability, as they call it. If there's an ability that you possess, that Pokemon possesses that no other Pokemon has in the entire game, then it's called a signature ability. And I believe Propeller Tail is an example of that. Beast Boost, not many Pokemon have that. Unaware, not many Pokemon have that. So you see, in general, there are a lot more abilities in Pokemon than there are types. So the ability a Pokemon has, or the abilities a Pokemon has access to, will oftentimes dictate how valuable or how viable that Pokemon is. So let's look at Garchomp. So any Pokemon will have up to 3 different abilities that it can choose between in any given battle. Versatility is very much, in many ways, a dictator of how effective a Pokemon can be. One thing that's really important in Pokemon is, so the typing is locked. You can't change your typing in Pokemon. But everything else, when you bring a Pokemon to a different battle, can be different. Your ability, you have 2 choices. You can only bring one to any battle, but you can change that between battles. Say I want to bring Sandville's a bit of a bad example for reasons I'll get into later, but in theory, let's say I want to bring Sandville on my Garchomp the first battle that I play. I can do that. Next battle I play, what if I want to switch it to Rough Skin? I can do that. Let's say I want to have the 4 moves, and I'll talk about moves later, but this is true for moves as well. Let's say I want to have the 4 moves on my Garchomp: Aqua Tail, Body Slam, Brick Break, and Crunch, theoretically. Okay. I play a battle with it, I realize I actually don't like this. I actually don't want Aqua Tail on my Garchomp anymore. I want Earthquake instead. I can do that. And boom, just like that, couple of clicks. Now my Garchomp has Earthquake instead. That is the ever-expanding difference between Pokemon and many other turn-based strategy games. Just the sheer number of possibilities every single Pokemon can have in any given battle. You start a battle, you know the 6 Pokemon you have, and you know what those Pokemon have. The only thing you see on your opponent's end are the 6 Pokemon that they have. But there are so many possibilities, either of those abilities, any of those moves, as well as some other things we'll get into later, that will dictate what kind of variant of that Pokemon it is. One of those choices is abilities. So in Garchomp's case, Garchomp has 2 abilities, Sandveil and Rough Skin, and I'll quickly go through what they do, just to kind of give you a little bit of an example of what abilities can do in competitive Pokemon. So the first ability Garchomp gets is Sandveil. So we read it: if Sandstorm is active, this Pokemon's evasiveness is multiplied by a multiplier of 1.25x. It also has immunity to Sandstorm. So Sandstorm, little bit of a brief explanation, is a weather. There are different things that can change the field effects in Pokemon. One of those is weather, and one of those potential weathers is Sandstorm. So let's say Sandstorm is active for whatever reason. If a Pokemon has the ability Sandveil, it's going to gain 2 benefits. First, it's going to be immune to the damage that Sandstorm inflicts, and then it's also going to gain an invasiveness bonus of 1.25x. Really strong if Sandstorm is out. Not very good if it's not. Doesn't really do anything if Sandstorm is not out. Okay. Garchomp's other choice is the ability Rough Skin. Pokemon making contact with this Pokemon lose 1/8 of their maximum hit points. I'll go into what contact is later, but the point here is that there are a list of moves in Pokemon that have a feature meaning that they make contact with the opposing Pokemon. So let's say I hit you with a Fire Punch, right, or a Mach Punch, or some kind of punch, right, or a kick. Most of those moves are going to make contact with the opposing Pokemon, just logically speaking. Compare that to, say, Thunderbolt, which is like a beam of something attacking another Pokemon, not going to make contact. So if you hit a Garchomp with a move that makes contact, that actually, touches the opposing Pokemon, Garchomp's Rough Skin will activate, and it will deal damage at the same time. So, yeah, you take damage from the attack you just took, but your opponent also takes damage from your ability. Pretty useful depending on how many contact moves you're going to be taking damage from, right? So abilities have a wide range of usefulness. Some are pretty situational, like Sandveil. Some are maybe even useless. We don't really have an example of that here. Some are pretty good. Rough Skin I would consider a pretty good ability, and then some are game-changing. Some are going to drastically change how that Pokemon is used and how effective that Pokemon is in general. And I'll maybe show some examples of that later. But that is what an ability can do. It's just an extra tool that each Pokemon has that's oftentimes very unique. So now let's move on to moves themselves. We've kind of talked about them already. Moves have a few different features that make them probably the biggest versatile feature of a Pokemon. So first off, we said this before, any Pokemon you have can have 4 moves on it at one time. So it can only be what we call running 4 moves at one time. However, it's going to have access to many more moves than that. You can scroll here for Garchomp, for example. There's a lot, right? Probably, 60, 70 moves or something like that, or 50 moves that Garchomp can choose between. Garchomp can have any 4 of those moves on its Pokemon at one time. But it can only have 4. And choosing what 4 moves you want to have is oftentimes going to be extremely important in dictating what you're doing with that Pokemon. Do you want a lot of attacks to do different types of damage to different types of Pokemon? Do you want some kind of non-attacks to do various utility things? It's very dependent on the Pokemon, right? Well, let's get into that difference. So there are three different, what we call statuses or categories of attacks: physical, special, and status. So there are three categories: physical, special, and status. Uh, Physical attacks and special attacks are both, well, attacks, and they kind of go into their own little Venn diagram themselves and are very different from what we call status type moves or status type attacks, which is a little bit confusing. But you have physical attacks, special attacks, and then status moves, and they're all moves that each Pokemon uses. On any given turn of a Pokemon battle, you have one Pokemon out that uses a move, and your opponent has one Pokemon out that also uses a move. And that is one turn of Pokemon. You have four moves to choose from in any given Pokemon. Okay. So what do these moves look like? Well, let's use the example of Aquatail earlier, and we can kind of show what each thing does. You see, there are different. I don't want to call them categories, but different sections that kind of show you what the Pokemon, what each move does. So first is the name. The name of this move is Aquatail. Second thing is the type of move. We talked about that before. Each move has a different typing as well, just like each move has, each Pokemon has a different typing. In this case, Aquatail's typing is water. Next, we have the category. It's not obvious if you've never played Pokemon before, but this signifies that the category is physical. I can show this on a different Pokemon here. Let me do this. So if you click on category here, you see the three different categories: physical, special, and status, right? So physical, these are physical attacks. They do damage physically. Special attacks are attacks that do damage specially. I'll talk about what the difference is between doing damage physically and doing damage specially in a little bit. And then finally, status attacks, which are these utility things. They are things that do not do... They're moves that don't do damage. They do something different. Sometimes much more important, depending on the move. In this case, Aquatail, as you see, is a physical attack due to that picture. The next thing is the base power of the attack. In this case, Aquatail has a base power of 90. Okay. Don't really have a frame of mind of what that means yet, but I'll just go ahead and let you know that's decently high. It's decently powerful. Next is the accuracy of the move. That is, if you click it, if you attack something with Aquatail, how often are you actually going to connect with the attack? That is a mechanic in Pokemon that is not always there in different turn-based strategy games. If you played chess before and you go to capture a piece, you don't only have a 90% chance of capturing that piece. It's always going to capture, right? Not true in Pokemon. You attack a Pokemon with Aquatail in this example, has an accuracy of 90%. That means you're only going to hit 90% of the time. 10% of the time, you're going to miss. You roll a d10, roll that 1, you're going to miss that attack. 1 out of every 10 times. And many Pokemon players will tell you this is one of the most infuriating aspects of the game. Oftentimes it's one of the most balancing, keeping other moves varied and balanced and fair. Maybe they're super powerful but not very accurate. But oftentimes it can also be infuriating. Let's take a move like Aquatail. Maybe you click that move 10 times, you're only supposed to miss once, but maybe you miss like 4 times in a row because you just get super unlucky. It sucks, but sometimes it happens. The next thing is the PP. If you have the mind of a 12-year-old, you're probably going to laugh at that. But it stands for power points. This stands for how many times... Power points are how many times you can use an individual move in any given battle. In actual Pokemon, power points are a lot more important because they don't heal between every battle. They only heal anytime you go to a Pokemon Center. But in a battle simulator like Pokemon Showdown, it heals between every battle. You're assumed to have full power points going to every battle. Finally, over here, there isn't a section for it, but these are the extra notes. These are the extra things that each move does. For example, you see for Aquatail, there's no additional effect. So all it does is the 90 base power, water type damage, cool. But if you look at, say, Body Slam, for example, Body Slam is going to have additional effects, right? It's a 30% chance, so Body Slam has a 100% accuracy, right? A lot of moves have a 100% accuracy, but a lot also don't. Body Slam will always hit, however, every time it does hit, it also has a 30% chance to inflict a status on the Pokemon, in this case, paralyzing the target. We'll talk about what that means later, but the point is it has what is called a secondary effect. Double Edge has what's called recoil damage. Draco Meteor does something bad to you. We'll talk about what that means later. See, a lot of moves have no additional effect, but also a lot of moves have smaller additional effects. 10% chance to burn, 30% chance to make the target flinch. We'll talk about what that means later. 30% chance to poison, 30% chance to flinch, 30% chance to burn, high critical hit ratio. I'll explain what that means later. You get the point. So any type of attack will have these sorts of additional notes or additional effects that it might have. So any physical attack, any special attack, that is how the attack is going to work. You have a typing, a category, either physical or special, base power, accuracy, how many times the move can be used in any battle, and then any additional effects it has as well. The final type of move is the status move. These moves do not do direct damage. Aqua Tail, Brick Break, Dragon Claw, Earthquake. These moves do damage. The moves we're talking about here do not do direct damage. I do not click a move like Hone Claws and that does damage to the opposing Pokemon. Instead, they do other things. Oftentimes, these are called utility moves. Moves that don't do direct damage, but instead will help you in some other way. And these are the ones that are probably the most complex to understand, because there is no uniform way in which they work. As you can see, a lot of the stuff that's kind of normally there to show you how effective a move isn't really there for these types of attacks. You have a type, but the typing doesn't really matter because you're not actually attacking anything with these moves. You see the category, it's a status move. These don't have a base power because they're not attacks. Most of them don't have an accuracy, some do. But if you see a dash for the accuracy, that means it always hits. There is no accuracy check. There's a difference between that and 100% accuracy. Not worth going into right now. They have a PP, but again, that's not very normal. And then this secondary effect is actually the primary effect, because the primary effect of an attack is the damage it does. There is no primary effect here, so the secondary effect, as it would be showing for an attack, is actually the effect of the move. Hone Claws, for example, it raises the user's attack and the user's accuracy by 1. What does that mean? I'll get into that in a little bit. Roar forces the target to switch. Stealth Rock hurts foes on switching, right? All these different things that these moves can do, they're very varied. Toxic badly poisons the target. We'll talk about what that means later. There's a lot to explain, as you can see, and we're over 30 minutes in already. In fact, we are 37 minutes in. This is going to go over 40 minutes. Sorry. But you can see I could talk about this for a really long time, of course. So, you have these various different types of moves, categories of moves, and they're extremely varied. But any Garchomp, for example, can only bring 4 of these moves at any one time. Pokemon Showdown tries its best to help by showing you what we would call useful moves, or moves that are generally effective, and then also usually useless moves that if you're new to Pokemon, you might want to ignore. Now, their classification between useful and useless is oftentimes very suspect. There are some moves here, for example, for Garchomp specifically, that I would definitely consider using at times. Scale Shot, for example. Probably the big one. Rock Tomb's not too bad either. Any others in particular for Garchomp? Not really, but you get the point. Even only 1 or 2 can kind of greatly change the perception of a Pokemon if you strictly follow the moves versus usually useless moves distinction that Pokemon Showdown has. That is not a thing within the game. It is just something that Pokemon Showdown offers to help people when they're building a team. So that is how moves work. The final thing the big thing, I don't know if I explained this accurately, each Pokemon, so there are only 4 moves you can bring on a Pokemon, but their move pull is going to be different for different Pokemon. You see, for example, Garchomp gets the move Outrage, right? Well, Barraskewda, a different Pokemon, does not get the move Outrage, I don't think at least. No, it does not. But Barraskewda gets a move like Liquidation. Cool move, right? Garchomp doesn't get that move. If you scroll down over to L, Garchomp doesn't get that move. So different Pokemon get different moves. I just wanted to make sure I explained that adequately as well before we moved on to the final thing that dictates how effective a Pokemon is, and that is its statistics, or its stats. So, each Pokemon has 6 statistics, or what we call base stats. I know I discussed base power earlier, it's the same type of idea. You start with a number, and then you go through various different calculations. So the number on the left here is what's called its base stats. And then you go through various different calculations and decisions here, here, and here, and you come out with a final number, an effective stat number. And the calculation to get from one to the other is partially super confusing stuff that I cannot explain in this video, and partially stuff that you have a lot of control over as the player, and stuff that I will explain here. So let's start with the base stats. You see Garchomp, so there's 6 stats. Hit points, attack, defense, special attack, special defense, and speed. Well, hit points determines how many hit points you have. That's pretty simple. So how many hit points of damage you have to take before you no longer can battle. The way you win a Pokemon battle is by making the opponent's Pokemon all drop down to 0 hit points or be unable to battle any longer. And you lose by having your 6 Pokemon drop down to 0 hit points, being unable to battle. Number of hit points, more hit points you have, more damage you have to take in order to drop down to 0. In this case, if we see just straight up what we have right now, Garchomp has 357 hit points. And if I just, this means nothing to you right now because you have no idea what this means if you've never played competitive Pokemon before, but if you see if I just move this bar all the way up here, now Garchomp has 420 hit points, just as an example. Cool. I'll explain what this bar is in a minute. The next stat is attack and then defense. These two stats kind of go hand in hand in many ways. You remember the different types, the different categories of moves earlier? How, say, Aqua Tail is a physical attack, but, say, Draco Meteor, as you see, it has the different category, the little circles here. That means it's a special attack. It's blue versus red. That is this distinction. So if you hit a Pokemon with a physical attack, so an attacker, let's say Garchomp, hits an opposing Pokemon with a physical attack. Well, the 2 stats that are going to be kept in mind to determine how much damage that attack does is going to be Garchomp's attack stats in the opposing Pokemon's defense stats. Vice versa is also true. If an opposing Pokemon hits Garchomp with a physical attack, how much damage it does is going to be dictated by the opponent's attack stat and Garchomp's defense stat. So the higher your attack stat is, the more damage you do with physical attacks. The higher your defense stat is, the less damage you take from physical attacks. And keep in mind the difference between, say, physical defense and HP. HP determines how much you can take before you drop down to 0 and can no longer fight. Defense lowers the amount of damage that is. So you see how, same thing here. So we start with a base defense stat of 95. Right now, that final number, whatever that means, is 226. And if I move this bar around, it increases the number up to 289. We'll explain what that means later. Don't worry. It doesn't make any sense right now without explanation, but we'll explain. I don't know who we is in this, by the way. I am the only person doing this. This is completely self-funded and also completely off the top of my head. Next, we have special attack and special defense, and they work the exact same way, except for special attacks. In this case, let's say Garchomp uses the move Draco Meteor on an opposing Pokemon. Well, you use Garchomp's special attacks, SP attack as it's abbreviated here. Opponent uses whatever Pokemon you're attacking's special defense stats, and that dictates how much damage it does. Vice versa, if Garchomp gets hit by a special attack, same thing. Finally, we have the speed stat. So the speed stat determines who moves first in any given turn. Just like the other stats, you have a base speed stat and then a final speed stat that's also determined by various things. We'll go into that later. But the speed stat's important because of how Pokemon works as a turn-based strategy game. This is the major difference between Pokemon and, say, chess or, say, poker. In poker, who goes when in any given turn is decided by position. In chess, who goes when is decided by, well, white goes first, then black, then white, then black, then white, then black. Any given turn, white gets a turn, black gets a turn. Pokemon functions in the same way as chess, except instead of one person getting to go first every time and one person going second every time, it's decided by each individual Pokemon's speed stat. So Garchomp is on the field, and an opposing Pokemon is also on the field. And you use your attack, so the turn happens. You use your attack, your opponent uses their attack. Who goes first? It's decided by the speed stat. If Garchomp's final speed stat, not base speed stat, final speed stat, after all these calculations, and I'll talk about what these calculations are later, or in a minute, if Garchomp's final speed stat is higher, then Garchomp will go first. If the opponent's final speed stat is higher, then the opponent will go first. This is called being faster than the opponent, slower than the opponent. Speed is probably the most important stat in the game, and oftentimes will dictate, basically being faster than your opponent will oftentimes dictate being able to succeed in any given battle that you're playing. Alright, so how this calculation thing is weird, right? This is a weird screen to be looking at. You have base stats over here, and then these boxes that you can put numbers in, and then a slider, and then what the hell are these? And then you have a final number. What is this? Okay, it's really complicated. Like I said, this is when it comes to just understanding competitive Pokemon, this is the most difficult part, almost certainly. So there are two different values of numbers that basically dictate the difference between this number and this number. The first are EVs, or what we call effort values, and the second are IVs, or what we call individual values. There are various ways to gain EVs and change IVs within Pokemon itself, and you can look into guides on how to do that. I will just go over the basics here. That is not the point of this. The point is understanding them to be able to play competitive Pokemon, not to be able to make your own team within a game. IVs are, in theory, dictated at birth, so a Pokemon is born and it has IVs. For each stat, those IVs will be anywhere between 0 and 31. 31 is the highest they can be. Don't ask me why the number's 31, because Pokemon said so. These are all very random in many ways. So, as you can see here, all I had to do was pull up Garchomp, and immediately all of them were 31. Is that because I'm the luckiest guy in the world? No. I'm actually a really unlucky person, but that's beside the point. Is that because I'm the luckiest guy in the world? No, that's because it's assumed that each Pokemon is going to have IVs of perfect, of 31, in any given stat, going into any battle. However, you can change that if you want. And as you can see, at least at the current level we're in, which I'm not going to explain, but in a normal Pokemon battle, max level, if you've ever played an actual Pokemon battle, level matters a lot more. In actual like Pokemon game, level matters a lot more here. In this level is assumed to be 100. At level 100, you change your IV, have it go down 1 point. The stat is going to go down 1 point as well. Have it go up 1 point. Stat is going to go up 1 point as well. That is what IVs are. So it's basically, in some ways, an extra 31 to every single one of your stats that basically helps change this number from this to this. Okay, cool. And IVs, in theory, dictated at birth, and you have complete control over what they are. You might want them to be lower for various reasons. I won't go into why here, but assume them to be at 31 in any given battle. The other thing, the thing that you have a lot more freedom over, or there's a lot less, obviously this is the correct decision over, is effort values. So, I'm going to move this bar, and I'm going to explain what it actually means now. Okay, what did I just do? Well, I just gave my Pokemon 252 effort values. Well, if you slow down that sequence, you can see that if I slowly do it, it's actually not going down or going up, if I do it the other way, in intervals of 1, like you might expect. It's actually going up. This number, what I'm talking about, is actually going up in intervals of 4. That is really important. 4 EVs in any stat will increase this number by 1. So you see right now there are 0 EVs in HP. If I put in, say, 2020, it goes from 357 to 362. The difference between 0, 357, and the max number of EVs, I'll talk about that in a second, 252, is 420. And that is whatever 252 divided by 4 is. I am really stupid. Is it 56? No, it's not. It's 64. Jesus. It's 64. Or it's 63. Because, yeah. I never did this math before because I'm stupid. 256 would be 64 times 4. In this case, it's 63. So the difference between the number 420 and the number 357 is 63. So if you fully invest, talk about what full investment is in a second, in one particular stat, you're going to raise your final number by a total of 63. Cool, right? So why? Okay, well, but what? Why can't? It looks like there's complete freedom in just fully investing in a stats. So why don't I just fully invest in all of my stats, right? Well, let's try that. Well, I fully invested in HP. Now I have 63 more hit points. It would work just like IVs, right? I just have 31 more IVs in HP, attack, defense, attack, speed, right? Well, I have my 252 EVs, so I have 63 more stat in HP. I have 252 EVs in attack, and what's happening? Well, this number, the EV number, it takes 252 to fully invest. There's a limit on that front. You can only invest 252 EVs in any one given stat. And you only have 510 EVs in total. Something funny about the number 510, 510 isn't divisible by 4. Don't know why, but yeah, that is technically. You see down here it says remaining 508. That's your EVs. So you have 508 EVs. Technically you have 510, but they're 2 that can't do anything. They will never actually increase your stats. But that is how EVs work. So you EV train, which is a pain in the ass in the actual games, but literally just moving a slider here. Let's say you want. So the breakdown of that normally is going to be any given Pokemon's probably going to be want to focus on 2 specific stats. If they're an offensive Pokemon, they might want to fully invest in their speed and fully invest in their attacks. That might look like, this and this. And the reason this works is the final number you get is, so 508, you could only go up to 252 in any one given stat, and 508 is just a little bit more than 252 times 2. So a lot of different sets, what you bring to a battle, will have 252 in one stat, 252 in another set, and then you'll have 4 leftover EVs, you see here. So that's what this guessed or suggested spread is over here. Fast physical sweeper, that means it wants attack, special speed, and then just put the 4 in special attack, because that's what it says. But you can put that 4 in any one thing, and that'll increase that final number by 1. So that is how you EV train a Pokemon in competitive Pokemon. However, you don't have to have max, what we call 252, 252 4 sets. They're pretty simple. You don't have to do that. You could have, like, say, 144 attack, and then 96 speed, and then 76 special defense, and then 72 special attack, and then, I don't know, 40 defense, and then 80 HP. You could do this. It's not normal. It's not standard, but you're allowed to do this. There's nothing quote-unquote wrong with it. And sometimes you'll want to. But in general, just if you're new to it, it's oftentimes a little bit more easy to understand and to make effective a set that is just 252, 252, and 4. I'll talk about what this plus and minus is in a second. You might be confused. I'll explain. But if a Pokemon, like I said, if you're physical attacking and you might want a lot of speed and attack. If you want to take a bunch of physical hits or special hits, you might want a bunch of HP and special defense. If you're like a bulky Pokemon that also wants to deal special hits, you might want to put HP and special attack. That could look like, this might have the, guess spread of bulky special attacker or bulky special tank. A bunch of HP, you have a bunch of special attack, put the 4 in whatever, right? Could be what it looks like. Or maybe you have some mix of HP, special attack, and speed. So you want to outspeed some things, but you also want to hit harder, but you also want to have some HP, right? You can. There's a lot of flexibility. Flexibility is the name of the game with Pokemon. Any Pokemon, Garchomp comes, and Garchomp could have a literal infinite number, not literally infinite, but a basically effectively infinite number of possibilities that Garchomp could have. It could have any combination of 4 moves that it gets access to. Its EVs can be combined in a million different ways. You could have, this is technically a different Garchomp from this. Is technically a different Garchomp from this. You get the point. It's a different Garchomp from that. So EVs are game changing in that way and provide an obscene amount of flexibility to any given Pokemon. So there's one final thing with stats that also dictates that final number, and that is what this minus and plus is. So you take it away, and you see if I add a minus and a plus to whatever two stats, let's just say I put the minus on defense and the plus in special defense, for example. Look at what it does to the bars here, which kind of are just an indicator of how high the stat is, and then also the numbers over here. So you see, before I do this, I just have the minus in right now. I've my final stat is 226 for defense and 206 for special defense. Well, if I put the plus in, it changes it to 203 for defense and 226 for special defense. Maybe a little bit more obvious is, let's say, I put the minus in special attack and the plus in speed. That's also invested. See, it's 303 right now and 196 for special attack. Boom. Now it's 176 and 333. What is this? Well, this is a Pokemon's nature. If you've ever played the game before and you look at the Pokemon stats page, it's going to look very different from this, but one of the things you will notice is a Pokemon's nature. Maybe it's adamant, jolly, timid, lax, gentle, serious, bashful, various things, right? There are like 25 different natures, 30 different natures. Well, every nature has an actual game difference in the Pokemon, in that the final stat of the Pokemon, one of its 6 stats will be multiplied, will be added an extra 5% to the final number, and one of them will be subtracted an extra 5% to the final number. Is it 10? Am I going crazy? It's 10%, I believe. It's a small difference, but it makes a really big difference. Let's just take speed, for example, right? So let's say that you have a Pokemon like Garchomp with a 102 base speed. Well, the final speed, if you have the investing nature, if you have a nature that gives you a plus in speed, and different natures will always give you the same plus and minus, you have a nature that gives you a plus in speed, well, that's 333. But if you don't do that, if you don't have the plus in speed, it's only 303. Maybe if you don't have that plus in speed, there are some Pokemon that have a lower base speed stat than Garchomp, but might be able to beat it out in that speed war if it has the full investment and a plus nature. You can just look at, say, Garchomp's 95 base defense stat. If you invest in it and have a plus nature, that's actually higher, despite the fact that Garchomp's has a higher speed stat than defense stat, because it has the plus nature in defense. It has a higher defense stat right now, effectively, than speed stat. Okay. And like I said, they're always the same thing, and they actually taught me some vocabulary as a kid. Words like adamant, modest, careful. I know what careful means. Gentle, hasty, impish. And this isn't something you have to memorize. You can just put the plus and the minus in, and it'll automatically set it for you, set what nature it is. But it's important to understand how it works. The final feature that a Pokemon can change is the item that it's holding. This also drastically changes the game and is extremely important, but there are so many items, and they're also actually separate from Pokemon, that it doesn't actually dictate how strong an individual Pokemon is. Any Pokemon can hold any item. Not all of them will be able to use every item, but any Pokemon can hold any item. So it's not actually going to change an individual Pokemon and how effective it is. One other last thing to mention about base stats when you're talking about dictating how strong or weak a Pokemon is. Obviously, having strong stats and weak stats are going to change things. Garchomp has a really high, what's called base stat total. These are your base stats, you have a base stat total. For Garchomp, it's 600. That means something, but, well, not the point. But, as you see, Garchomp specifically has a really high, 130 is a really big number, physical attack stat, and a pretty high speed stat. So Garchomp's probably going to want to lean towards being a fast physical sweeper, or fast physical attacker, with investment in attack and speed, and hitting things hard with physical moves, and being fast. That's what Garchomp's good at. Let's compare that to a Pokemon like, say, Blissey is a very extreme example of this. Blissey has a monstrous HP stat, as you can see, 255. It almost doesn't fit on the screen, and that number is stupid. but has a horrible defense stat, but has a pretty good special defense stat. Terrible attack stat. Usable special attack stat. Not good, but usable. Well, what's Blissey good at? Blissey's really good at taking special hits with a monster special attack, special defense stat, and HP stat. It's not very good at taking physical hits, but if you invest in it, it can make a big difference. It is never going to be attacking with its physical attack. It generally doesn't want to attack with its special attack either, but it could. But Blissey is effective. It's in the overused tier because it's good at taking special hits. In Pokemon, oftentimes what's important is your effectiveness compared to other things that could do the same thing. If something else does the same thing that you do, but better, then it's going to be more effective than you are, and it's going to be the higher tier. Now let's talk about tiering. The most popular form of competitive Pokemon is Pokemon Showdown's ladder. Or if you've ever played chess, you know what an ELO ladder looks like. It works the exact same way here, except the scaling is a little bit different. But basically, the most common way to do it is you go click here, you click on Format, you click on OU here, which stands for Overused. You make a team. I don't have a team made, but you make a team here. Let's just, I'm just clicking Pokemon for the sake of it. Let's grab our good old Garchomp example and this guy. And you see, boom, I have 6 Pokemon now. Now, before I can actually play a battle, I have to decide for each of these 6 Pokemon, what item are they holding? What ability do they have? What moves do they have? What stats do they have? Maybe I want a different Pokemon with a different typing. I have to do that 6 times over. Different Pokemon with different move pools, different stats, different abilities, different typings. And then I decide my team, and then I click Battle, find a random opponent, and then I battle. And in a given battle, you see your 6 Pokemon, you see your opponent's 6 Pokemon, and then you pick a lead, and then both of your Pokemon have a lead, and then you battle. That's the basis of how competitive Pokemon works. So what is this tiering thing I'm talking about? Well, this form of Pokemon, Pokemon Showdown, battling on a ladder against a random opponent, this is the most popular format, and the first thing you'll want to learn if you're playing competitive Pokemon. Excuse me. The way they determine their tiers is through what's called usage-based tiering. So the way this started way back in the day in like the 4th generation of Pokemon or the 5th generation of Pokemon, when Pokemon Showdown started, I think it was in 5th gen, they took the entire conglomerate of 649 Pokemon at the time and said, okay, we already know that this Pokemon, this Pokemon, this Pokemon, this Pokemon, and this Pokemon are too strong for what we want to have in what's called a healthy metagame. Metagame in Pokemon is just like a metagame in any other type of competitive format. Different things are going to be in season, in fashion. Different things are not. But in our game, we think that it would be broken to use this Pokemon. Most of this Pokemon, we're talking what are called box legends in Pokemon. If you've ever played a Pokemon game, one that shows up on the box, if you played Pokemon X, for example, Xerneas, Yveltal, Zekrom, if you played Pokemon Black, Rayquaza, if you played Pokemon Emerald, Giratina, those box legends, the big Pokemon that's like super duper powerful that you get near the end of the game usually, that is the Pokemon we're talking about. Those are banned. They're in the Ubers tier. That's the highest tier, the most effective, the most viable Pokemon in the entire game that are too effective and too viable for normal competitive play. Ban all of those, and then, at the beginning, that's it. That's all you have. You just ban all those Pokemon, and then you start with Overused. That is what OU stands for, Overused. And anytime a new generation starts, that's all you have. You have the broken Pokemon, the banned Pokemon, and Ubers, and then Overused. And then, after a few months, you keep track of, in any battle that's played in the Overused tier, how often are every single Pokemon brought to a battle. You can only bring 6 Pokemon. There are 600 something, or at this point almost 1,000 Pokemon you could use. Well, how often is every single Pokemon brought? Well, and then you set a specific cutoff. I think oftentimes the cutoff is like 3.5% or 3%. And then any Pokemon that's used less than that amount, all of the Pokemon that are used more than that are kept in that tier Overused, and then you make a new tier, Underused, is what it's called, UU. And then all the Pokemon that were used less than 3.5% or 3.3% or whatever the percentage is, All of those are allowed now, and then you let that become a metagame. And then eventually, a few months later, do the same thing. Cut off at 3%, 3.5%, whatever. Cut off to RU, or rarely used. And you can see if you're choosing a format, you get all these choices. OU, Ubers, UU, RU, and then eventually NU, same thing, never used. And then PU, same thing, doesn't actually stand for anything but worse than never used. And then eventually ZU is the same idea, also doesn't stand for anything, but the point is it's the tier below PU. So you start with OU, this is the main tier, the tier that shapes everything that when you're talking about a competitive metagame in Pokemon, it's the quintessential metagame. And then UU is under that, and then RU, NU, PU, and then ZU. And then there are various other formats here. You can look at older generations and various other types of games. And then, of course, also Ubers, which is the land of the giants. And then, yeah, that is the basis of how Pokemon works, and how the overused tier or the overused format works. And that is competitive Pokemon. I'm trying to think if there's anything else I need to bring up here. Obviously, okay, there is one last thing that I forgot to mention that is pretty important with the mechanics of Pokemon. So we talked about stats, right? So this is, let's go back to Garchomp, right? We have effective stats. This is going to get a little confusing. I will try my best to explain it as effectively as I can. So you might have noticed for some of the additional effects of moves that they increased the stats of a Pokemon. Let's take a move like Swords Dance, for example. What does it say? It raises the user's attack by 2. By 2, what does that mean? I mean, you'd think with how these calculations work, the difference between, say, if I'm fully invested in attack, 359, if I'm increasing it by 2 to, 361? That's like that means nothing. That has absolutely, it's probably not that hard to figure out. That would have no difference on the calculation. Well, that's not what it means. Raising a stat, what we call is by stages. Each stat has various stages that it can be increased and decreased by. Once you're on the field in a game, every single one of your stats begins at a specific stage. That stage is called 0. And what a 0 stage does is it gives a multiplier to your final stats that gives you additional stats. So in this case, once Garchomp's on the field, it starts with with everything: attack, defense, special attack, special defense, speed of stage 0. One thing I forgot to mention, both with natures and with stages, you cannot increase HP like that. Your HP stat is your HP stat. Okay, cool. Attack, defense, special attack, special defense, speed, any given one of them, they start at stage 0, which means there's no difference in your number. What that means, actually, is that it multiplies that number at first. If it's at stage 0, it actually does have a multiplier. That multiplier is the number 2 over 2. Think fractions. Numerator 2, denominator 2. 2 over 2. Alright. If your stage goes up or down by a stage, or by 2 stages, when Swords Dance says raises user's attack by 2, that means it's raising the user's attack by 2 stages. So if the stage goes from 0 to what is called being plus 2. So you go from the 0 stage to the plus 2 stage. Well, what does that do to that number, that multiplier we talked about, 2 over 2? Well, it changes the numerator from a numerator of 2, it increases the numerator by 2 stages, from 2 over 2 to 4 over 2. So instead of this final number being multiplied by 2 over 2, the number is instead multiplied by 4 over 2, or 2, right? If you've ever played on Pokemon Showdown, you'll see, let's say after you use the move Swords Dance, you'll see a little green 2x attack under your Pokemon's name. That is what that means. Your attack was just multiplied by 2. If you use Swords Dance a second time, if you're already at plus 2 attack, and you use Swords Dance a second time, well, that numerator goes from 4 over 2 to 6. Can't do it with one hand. 6 over 2, or times 3. You're at plus 4 attack now. You use it a third time, you're at plus 6 attack, or at 8 over 2 times 4. This works in reverse as well. Let's say somehow your attack gets lowered by 2 stages. Well, your multiplier goes from 2 over 2 to 2 over 4, or times 0.5, or 1 divided by 2, your attack is halved. 2 over 6 is somehow your attack gets reduced by 4 stages, or at what we call minus 4. Well, 2 over 6, that is 0.33, or then finally at minus 6, 2 over 8, 0.25, and so on and so forth. It could only go as high as plus 6, as low as minus 6. So a lot of these different stats are going to be doing that. Sword Stance, a lot of these different moves will be doing that. Raises the user's attack by 2. You can see a lot of moves do this. Draco Meteor, after you use a very powerful attack, right, 130 base power is really high, lowers the user's special attack by 2. So after you use Draco Meteor, your special attack gets halved, or lowered by 2 stages. If somehow your special attack was already increased by 2 stages, then it would just go back to what's called neutral, or plus 0. A lot of moves. Hone Claws, as we saw earlier, raises the user's attack and accuracy by 1 stage. That's what it means. Times 1.5. Accuracy works a bit differently, but for attack, that would be raising the numerator from 2 over 2 to 3 over 2, which would be times 1.5. And so on and so forth. Various different moves all do this. Another example, let's say Confide is a move, lowers the target's, so the opposing Pokemon's special attack by 1 stage. You get the point. Different moves are going to be able to do different things like this. So that's kind of the final basic gist of Pokemon. Any Pokemon's stats, any Pokemon's viability is going to be decided by these various things. Its typing, its abilities, its move pool, and then its stats, and finally base stat total, as you see over here. And the scaling for this is something you'll just get comfortable with if you start playing Pokemon. You'll know that a base stat total of 600, for example, with Garchomp, as we see, is really high. Compared to, say, a base stat total of a Pokemon like Bisharp, for example. 490 sounds a lot lower, but Bisharp is still useful for other reasons. But, you know, a typing like Dragon Ground for Garchomp is pretty strong. You compare that to a different typing, the Pokemon might be a lot worse, might not be in OU, might be in a different tier, because its typing is a lot worse. Its move pool, Garchomp's move pool is pretty strong. Garchomp's a really strong Pokemon, a really good Pokemon. Compare that to a Pokemon's move pool that might be really bad. Let's compare it to, like, Blacephalon, for example. Blacephalon's also in OU, but if you look at its move pool, it's a lot smaller. Or its versatility is a lot smaller. You see basically only fire moves, right? Just quickly scrolling through this when it comes to attacks. You basically just have Fire, Ghost, and Psychic, which is not a lot. Compare that to Garchomp, when even just looking at, you know, physical attacks, Garchomp has Water, Normal, Fighting, Dark, Dragon, Ground, Fire, Steel, Poison, Rock, Flying, Flying, sort of. Point is, Garchomp is a really strong, good Pokemon because it has a good typing that resists a number of things. It has good move pool and a lot of type versatility, so it can hit a lot of different types of attacks. It has a really good stat distribution, good stats, so sometimes it's more useful to have different stats. And it has a good ability, so that makes it a really good Pokemon. Let's compare that to a bad Pokemon. Let's compare that to, let's say, quintessential bad Pokemon. Let's compare it to, I don't know. Let's compare it to, sure, Appletun. Appletun is a Grass Dragon type, so the first thing you want to look at is its typing. Well, Grass Dragon is a lot worse than Ground Dragon, for reasons I will not go into right now, but the point is, just trust me, it's worse. More weaknesses, fewer useful resistances. Okay. Its abilities, these aren't bad abilities, but they're not super useful. Its move pool, nothing special, and then its stats, also not very strong, base stat total of 485. So that is the basis of why Appletun, as a Pokemon, is not very good, and why Garchomp, as a Pokemon, is very good. And its tiering is decided by how often it is used in the specific metagame that we're talking about. In overused case, Garchomp is overused, because it is used in that tier enough to be within the tier. Appletun isn't used in the tier at all, so it's not overused. In fact, it's not even in PU. And I won't go back down to show that, but it isn't. So that is the basis of how competitive Pokemon works. And Yeah, I could go into detail of a lot of different facets of Pokemon from here. I have not even scratched the surface of Pokemon as a game. I could go into how Draft League works as Pokemon as competitive Pokemon. I could talk about how Nuzlocke work. I could talk about VGC as a format. This is just basic competitive Pokemon. I could make hour-long videos about all of these different things if people were interested. It's just that I highly doubt that people are interested. I think that is everything for now. Completely off the top of my head for an hour and 15 minutes. I think that'll be it. I will see you guys later, I guess. Hope you enjoyed it if you cared to watch.